Alright, so for this one, it's basically more of the same, but it's a little more complicated because of the nature of the functions. And so we're going to add, and we're going to subtract, and then we're going to multiply, and then we're going to divide. So we're going to do all four. Then we're going to evaluate when x equals 2. So let's just let's start labeling things. So f of x is going to be the square root of x. G of x is going to be the square root of 9 minus x squared. This is actually pretty easy, but if I wanted to do f plus g of x, I could just leave it as the square root of x, right? Wow, let me do that a little differently. I know some of you guys use the different colors, which is good, because I like to use the different colors because you could see which is which, right? So this is my f of x, right? Because it's just f of x plus g of x. So then this is my g of x, which is this. All right, and we're just going to add that. So then if I wanted to say f plus g, and really there's nothing, because they're not like terms. I mean, we could, you really, there's no simplifying this one. You just leave it this way. Next, we need to evaluate it when x equals 2. So we rewrite that with the square root of 2 plus the square root of 9 minus the square root of 2, or 2 squared, right? So on the next line, this stays the square root of 2 plus 9 minus, what's 2 squared? It's 4, right? So what's 9 minus 4? 5. Okay, so we're going to have to use the calculator to find the answer for this one. So I'm just going to turn it in. If you didn't get a fancy calculator, go ahead and grab one. We're going to need fancy calculators every day for the rest of this chapter, okay? So make sure you just grab one of those. So then I basically, there's two ways to do this. I could put in the whole equation. In other words, I could hit second square root of 2 plus second square root, and then put it in as 9 minus 2 squared. Now this will give us a decimal, 3.65. Remember, it's asking us to round to 2 decimal places. Or if I wanted to double check my work, I could just say the square root of 2 plus the square root of 5. Now this last line is the one I want you to do, right? I'm not teaching you, this isn't calculator 2, this is algebra 2. So I'm teaching you to go from this first line down to the second line, but to double check and make sure I did my work correctly, I'm going to do it this way. And if both numbers match, then I did the algebra correctly, right? This to here is algebra. That's what I'm teaching you. But to double check that you did not make a mistake, you can enter it in this way. That'll give you a decimal. Then enter it in this way. That should give you the same decimal, okay? So it says to round to 2 decimal places, right here. And so we would, since we're rounding, instead of using the equal sign, whoops, went a little crazy there on the pen, I would say approximately 3.65. Okay? So that's, and then we should probably, for good measure, we should probably just say f plus g evaluated at 2. Okay? And so if you were to graph this on the graphing calculator, which we're not going to do today, the 0.2 comma 3.65 approximately would show up on the graph. Let's do the next one. We're going to say f minus g of x. Oops. I get so gung-ho sometimes. F minus g of x. And that's equal to the square root of x. This time we're going to say minus g of x, which is 9 minus, oops, I'm getting ahead of myself, minus x squared. Okay. And we already know what this is going to be, so on my next line I would say f minus g of x. Handwriting's a little sloppy on this thing. We know that this is going to be the square root of 2 minus the square root of 5, right? Because we already know that, and, oh, shoot, man. First problem of the day, I'm making all kinds of mistakes. We're evaluating this at 2, right? So the only thing that's changed is that this right here is a plus sign, plus sign, plus sign. Over here it's a negative sign. So we're going to get these same two values on the bottom, except instead of adding, we're going to subtract them. Same thing here. We go back to our fancy calculator. Here's a little trick on these calculators. If I hit the up button until I get to here and I hit enter, it copies and pastes it, right? Technically, I should probably go up here, and if I hit enter, it'll automatically copy and paste that. Then I use the left arrow button to change that plus sign to a minus sign. And then once I'm outside of all the square root symbols and stuff, then if I hit enter, I'll get this decimal. Okay? Now I'm going to come up here and go up. Whoops, I went up too far. Copy and paste that over. Change that plus sign to a minus sign. Hit enter. And I get the same thing. Now we're rounding to do 2 decimal places, so I go to the 3rd decimal place. I am shocked. There was a problem on the last test where you had to round to 3 decimal places. A lot of people got that wrong. So we're rounding to 2 decimal places, which means that we look at the 3rd decimal place. If it's 4 or less, then you round down to 0.82. If this was a 5 or higher, then we would round up to 0.83. If I just off the top of my head, if I were to guess, a lot it is a very high percentage. I was surprised. So maybe at some point we need to review rounding. Okay, we're halfway done. The next thing we want to do is f of g. Or not f of g, fg, which means we're going to multiply. Remember, f times g is the same as the square root of x times the square root of 9 minus x squared. Now, since they're both square roots, what we can do is we can combine them. So I can do like this. I could say x times 9 minus x squared. So what do you think we would do there? Well, we're going to have to distribute the x through the parentheses. Okay? So then I have 9x minus x squared. Now you might think to yourself, well, I can factor or do something, but no, just leave it like that. This is the factored version. Technically, you could factor this too, but there are no perfect squares in this scenario. So any type of factoring or manipulation that we would do, I'm not going to be able to pull out anything really specifically from under the radical. Well, now we got to evaluate this by 2. So I'm going to say the square root of 9 times 2 minus 2 squared. Okay? So what is 9 times 2? 18. Minus, what's 2 squared? 4. So what is 18 minus 4? The square root of 14. So FG evaluated at 2 equals the square root of 14. Now they said round to 2 decimal places, so I'm going to have to plug this in my fancy calculator to see. So if I just say the square root of 14, I get that answer. Let me clear this real quick and I'll hit enter again. So if I round that, I feel like I made a mistake somewhere. We might have to go back. I did make a mistake. Do you guys know what my mistake is? Guys, when we push this x through, what's x times x squared? That's x to the 3rd power. So this is negative 2 to the 3rd power. So instead of this being 4, this would be 8. I'm just going to have to erase this. So then my final answer would be the square root of 10. Whew. Alright. Did you guys see where I made my mistake? I forgot to push. That's a common mistake. You guys make it all the time. I make it too. That's why it's important to plug stuff into the calculator and double check your work. When I plugged it in the calculator and I realized, oh wait, that doesn't seem right, that's when I said I made a mistake somewhere, and then I went back because I wrote all my work out. I realized where I made my mistake. I went right back here real quick to realize that I did it wrong. So let me just clean this up a little bit. So this should be x to the 3rd power. This should be 2 to the 3rd power, and then that will give you the 8. All right, cool. So let's plug the right thing in into the calculator. So we're going to say the square root of 10. Okay. Now remember, that's the same as f of x, which is just a square root of x, or in this case, we're just going to say the square root of 2, right, times the square root of 9 minus 2 squared. And then we said that our final answer, I accidentally deleted it, was the square root of 10. So what I'm trying to get you to do is go from here to here. And so I'm teaching you the algebra to combine this and make it like this, okay? And so we ended up with the right answer. Now if you round to the 2nd decimal place, 2 decimal places, 1st decimal place, 2nd decimal place, I look at the 3rd decimal place. Just go to the right 1 space. If it's 4 or lower, then you keep it as 1/6. If this was a 5 or higher, you would round up to 1/7. So our answer is approximately, and you know what, I made a mistake up here too. Remember, whenever we round our answer, we should use the approximation symbol. So this is approximately 3.16. Last thing we got to do is we got to say f divided by g. Oh man, we're doing a lot of math today. So that's just going to be the square root of x, which is f, all over the square root ooh, I got to be careful on that one. Minus x squared. Now, this doesn't really change anything, really, truthfully, but because they're both square roots, I could think of it like this. The square root of x over 9 minus x squared. Again, there's really nothing to simplify. You look for squares, you pull them out. There's nothing that I can pull out a square. So then, now I just evaluate it at 2. So if I say f divided by g evaluated at 2, then it would just be the square root of 2 all over 9 minus 2 squared. That's the same as the square root of 2 divided by 5, right? Plug it in our calculator. The square root of 2 divided by 5. Okay, enter. I get this 0.63. Then we put the long version in. The original version was the square root of 2 divided by the square root of, oops, delete, the square root of 9 minus 2 squared, hit enter, same thing. All right. So the algebra, what I'm teaching you is to go from this step to this step, and we use this to double check our work. Again, rounding to 2 decimal places. 6.3. I have to make a decision. Do I leave that as 6.3 or change it to 6.4? I look to the number on the right. If it is greater than 5 or greater, I would round up to 6.4. If it is 4 or less, I just leave it as 0.63. Since this is a 2, I leave it as 0.63. So then we would say that our answer, f divided by g, evaluated at 2, is approximately 0.63. Okay. Are there any questions on that? All right. I'll leave that up for just a second.